who's been helping run this entire week, and they are far more technically proficient than I am. I get to be the pretty face in the stream, so I hope I've succeeded in part in that goal. But in any case, I get to turn this over to Ben Bowie. He is an entrepreneur turned web developer. He's a fractional CTO, and he has diverse experience in running projects, in building projects, and I'm extremely excited for this session. So Ben, I'm just going to turn it over to you, and at any point, if you have questions or comments, please drop them in the comment box. I'm sure we'll get them answered at the end. But for now, Ben, it's take it away.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here to talk about what I call the successful non-technical founder. And the catalyst for this topic was the thought that, have you ever found that there isn't an app for that? There's lots of apps on the market. In fact, sometimes there's a surprising number of apps for the things that the problems that we want to solve. But I know as I dig into my career, I'm increasingly confronted with opportunities where there isn't an app. And you may be the same. Opportunities like paper. Are we still doing this on paper? I set up a 401k for my company a couple months ago, and was surprised to find that there are industries still that are doing everything on paper. Or other opportunities like, what if we leverage real-time data to accomplish the task that we're trying to accomplish? Or maybe leverage crowd data. These are all opportunities that in your industry there may not be an app for. And the goal today is to hopefully share some tips and tricks that will allow you as a non-technical person to complete technical projects successfully. Now, the internet is not like a gold rush where the wealth creation is limited to a small supply of something that's going to eventually run out. Jeff Bezos called the internet, he used what's called the electric metaphor. And that is just that the internet is kind of like electricity, where it's going to enable innovation for years and years to come. So the question is, are you capitalizing on that yet with your business or team? And if not, how can you? So today I'm going to, the goal is to just share some tips that will help you realize that you can take advantage of the opportunities that are on the internet right now. So the electric metaphor, I want to dig into that a little bit. If you haven't heard of Jeff Bezos, then you've definitely heard of his company, Amazon.com, the largest internet company in the world in terms of revenue. What you may not know is that in 2003, his company almost failed completely. It was right after the dot-com bubble. His access to capital had dried up. His stock had shrunk by 90%. He had executives leaving his team in droves. And a lot of investors thought this internet thing, it may just be a fad and it may just be all over. Well, one of Jeff's executives commented how calm he seemed to be in that difficult time. And as we look back, I think it's because Jeff knew something that they didn't. He had some secret knowledge that helped him weather that storm. And he actually shared that knowledge in a TED Talk in 2003, where he went through the history of the gold rush and how he basically made the point that the internet is not like that, where there's a limited supply of gold and we just have to try to get as much of it before it runs out. But he kind of outlined how the internet is a horizontal enabling layer, that will enable an innovation for the next 100 years. For electricity, the first killer app was the light bulb. And that app basically wired America. It took about 30 years for that to happen. And then on top of those wires came what was called the golden age of appliances, starting with the iron, the vacuum, the what are some others? The washing machine. Oh, that was a very scary application for electricity. If you go back and look at the history, the toaster, eventually the robot. Electricity has become the foundation of life in the world. And if you don't believe me, just let the power go out in your house and see how many times you go to flip on the light switch. I know we were up camping in a cabin this last week and the power went out for 6 hours. We were beside ourselves. We actually went out and looked at the stars. It was amazing. It was beautiful. Saw the new comet. But the same is going to happen with the internet. We're now 17 years past his TED Talk, Jeff's TED Talk, and innovation continues to happen online. The metaphor continues to hold, and I want to just end this section with an advertisement he shared from Sears in 1917, so over 100 years ago. The advertisement was, quote, "Use your electricity for more than light." And I think that's really where we are here in 2020. Use your internet for more than cat memes. Use your internet for more than social media. There's lots of opportunities still. We're just entering in the next 50 years of innovation online. And the big question is, are you ready? Is your team ready? Do you have an internet strategy? And if not, we need to get one. And so hopefully I can share some tips today about that. So a little bit about who I am. I'm a non-technical convert. I used to be non-technical. Now I'm more technical. I've always been entrepreneurial. I've started 3 businesses and 1 nonprofit. 2 of those organizations are still around, creating jobs and helping people. And one of them is actually the company where I do a lot of technical work, Blink Web Development. We've helped many non-technical founders pursue their dreams. We've built analytics platforms, budgeting apps, streaming video services, mobile apps, and one of our founders ended up raising $4 million in VC funds, and we had another founder be acquired by a larger competitor. So we've had a lot of experience in technical projects for non-technical people. I want to just quickly, if you don't mind, go through kind of the nightmare and the catalyst, what led me to do what I'm doing with my career right now. And I think hopefully you'll be able to relate a little bit if you've ever worked on a technical project in the past. I was a young professional. I worked in corporate America. I had a small family, but I knew I wanted to be more entrepreneurial. I knew I wanted to kind of do something on my own, start my own business. And I had this idea for a business deals site for parents. It was kind of like Groupon, but it was about a year before Groupon really became popular. So the timing wasn't bad. Anyways, I shopped the idea around and got a couple quotes. One quote was for $25,000 to build my little business, and I was shocked. It was definitely sticker shock. I had 10,000 to my name, and that just wasn't going to work. So I shopped it around some more. I found this onshore, offshore team to help me build this business, and they quoted it at $5,000. So I was super excited, and I signed on the dotted line, and they went to work, and everything was great. It took a little bit longer than usual, but that's typical for technical projects, and it ended up costing twice as much. So it basically used all of my savings. And finally I had what seemed like a working application, and finally got the code back, started reading through the code. They kind of kept it in a black box. It was a little unusual. They didn't let me see the code until I had made the last payment. But I started reading through the code, and I was shocked, to say the least. I was a little bit horrified to find some big problems. The code base was hard to read. It although it worked, it seemed to work. They had done some stuff that made it impossible to update the code in the future. And the worst thing that had happened was they left some big security loopholes, and I was ruined. All my savings was gone. My idea was kind of dead in the water, and I really had no choice at that point but to become technical. And so I spent the next year learning how to code and fix that code base, eventually launched a company, and then have now spent the last 9 years learning how to be successful at technical projects. So that's a little bit about my story, and now we'll jump into a couple tips that will hopefully help you avoid some of the pitfalls that are still in the industry. The first tip is to avoid the amazing Technicolor Dream Coder. I'm not sure why the first solution for people as a non-technical person, the first person that you go to look for is like the Steve Wozniak for Steve Jobs, the guy who's, he lives in his parents' basement. He's been coding since he's 12, and he's a genius. I mean, great guy to have on the team. But what I'm saying is he's maybe not the first person you need to be thinking about. The more I've learned about this industry, the more it's interesting how similar building software and building technology projects are to building physical projects like a building or a house. The first physical building project I was ever involved in was a space for student startups at CU. And I had never been involved in a remodel or a building out a space. And luckily we had some good advisors, and they advised us to find a general contractor who could then engage the different resources you needed to accomplish the project. And that was great advice, because it's unlikely that you're going to find a plumber who's also an amazing HVAC person, or a drywaller who's great at pouring concrete foundations. So they're just, building a house or a building has just become so complex that you hire the general contractor, and then they kind of build out the scope and find all the resources that you need. So the same is true for technical projects. Particularly on the internet, it's become so complex that one person is not able to do it all anymore. Maybe back in the beginning of the internet, you could find the Steve Wozniak kind of amazing Technicolor Dream Coder, but today it's just too complex with design, user experience, front end development, back end development, DevOps, security. You're just not going to find one person that has all that. And so my big takeaway for this first tip is start thinking like a team. You need to, yes, maybe the amazing Technicolor Dream Coder is one of those people on the team, but the most important person is the next tip, which is the fractional technology leader. They don't have to be fractional, but the most important thing here is you need to think as a team, and the first most important person on the team is the technology lead. You as a non-technical person are not going to be able to contribute to the team in this way. You need somebody who knows the business and who is the general contractor. So this is my second tip, and it kind of goes without saying. I mean, it's kind of intuitive that you need that one person, you need that technical co-founder. But I mention it just because of how often it's missed. And this person needs to be like a 2,000 hour, 20-year experience kind of person. They have to, and what they've been doing for those hours is important. They can't have been tucked back in an IT room, uh, working on servers the whole 20 years. They need to have seen projects from start to finish. They need to have worked with designers. They need to understand a little bit about SEO. They need to understand security. They need to have seen big projects from start to finish. This is the person that you need on the team. And this is a little bit difficult because these people are expensive. Our industry hasn't been stagnant, and I did a quick search on some salaries for this type of general contractor person. It looks like their salaries range from about $150,000 to $300,000 a year. So it's not easy as a small startup or as trying to complete a small project. It's not easy to find these people. That's why I included in the title the keyword fractional. This is a type of person that is becoming increasingly more common in the gig economy. Somebody who works on lots of projects so that any one project doesn't have to bear the full cost of the expertise that you absolutely need to complete a technical project successfully. So definitely look for a fractional person. And so again, we have our team mindset. We're looking for our technical lead, and that leads us into our next tip. How do we find these people? Unemployment, like I said, in web development has been very low. That means wages have not been stagnant. And to make matters worse, tech giants like Google and others are inflating wages. They're basically printing money, and they can afford a crazy amount of benefits and very high salaries. Now, the thing that you have going for you as a small team or a small startup is that working at these big companies is, how could I say this gently, mindless and soul-sucking. Well, I won't be that negative, but I've known a lot of people that work in these companies, and yes, the benefits are amazing. Yes, the salary is awesome, but the day-to-day work is less than ideal. And it works for some people, but that is your big selling point, is the work that they're going to be doing on your project is going to be, world changing, hopefully. So, so it's not going to be easy, but it is possible. And I want to share a little bit about how to find these good people. The three things we use at Blink are cultural fit, confidence, and reputation. Now, I can't say much that I think will be helpful for you in terms of cultural fit, except that the best way to see if somebody fits your culture is to make sure they have the same values you do. So for instance, at Blink, our values are quality, value, and clarity. So when we ask our filtering questions, our interview questions, we use those values to determine what questions we ask. And when we put people through a test, which I'll talk about in a little bit, we make sure that our test is set up to test those values that are important to us. Your values will be different, so I won't spend too much time on cultural fit, but I think I do have a little bit of value to offer in terms of confidence. When you're trying to build software or build technology, a lot of times you're working right on the edge of what's been done. And so you need people who are comfortable doing hard new things. You need people who are comfortable in that amount of uncertainty. And we found that confidence is extremely important. It's an extremely important indicator of people who will succeed with that kind of uncertainty. Now, the problem with confidence is best illustrated by what's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. This is a psychological principle that was discovered by two Cornell psychologists. And it's basically, quote, a cognitive bias whereby people who are incompetent at something are unable to recognize their own incompetence. So basically, what does that mean? They took, one of their experiments is they took these people and asked them a series of questions. They were actually jokes. They told them a bunch of jokes, and then they asked them if the joke was funny to other people. Not if they thought it would be funny for themselves, but if it was funny to other people. And then after they asked them about all these jokes, they then asked them to rate their own ability to judge humor. Were they good at judging humor or not? And so then they compared those answers. And what they found is that the people who were the worst at guessing if other people would like the joke also rated themselves the best judge of humor. So it doesn't really work that way, right? So in other words, the less experience, so with that experiment and other experiments, they ended up finding that the less experience any person has in a given subject, the more confident they think that sometimes they think they are at it. So their confidence doesn't mean anything because it's not backed by experience in essence. So when looking for developers, we basically do this. We ask them how confident they are in the skills that we need, and then we compare that to how many years experience they have in that skill. And if they have too little experience, they're really confident, which is good, but they have too little experience, then their confidence doesn't mean anything. And if they're not confident at all, but they have a lot of experience, well, it's not likely that they're going to perform well because they don't have the confidence to kind of deal with the unknowns in technology. So hopefully that's helpful a little bit. And the last thing that we use to filter is reputation. So we're in a reputation economy. LinkedIn has recommendations. A lot of these developer sites have reviews. Public reviews are the best. And then if we can't see any public information like that, we use what do they call them, references. But references are like old school now. Anyways, next tip. So we filtered our developers, but you're still on a mission to find your technical lead and other technical people to help you on your project. And the next thing you have to do once you've filtered them out is see if they can code. And the only way to do this is the test. We test every person that's added to a project. And the way we test is important because there's a big difference in our industry between book smarts and street smarts. There's a lot of online tests. So for you as a non-technical founder, there's a lot of companies online offering tests for the finer points of JavaScript or, a certain framework that you could give to developers to test their abilities at a certain framework. The problem with these tests are a lot of times they'll like dig deep into the documentation and they'll ask, deep within this functionality, there's this one option and what does it do? That's just not helpful to find someone that's going to be able to deliver code on a consistent basis. Case in point, early in my career in this business, I had a client who had some great relationships with a teacher or some professors at, I think it was Columbia University in their computer science program. And he wanted us to bring in some interns to lower the cost of the project. The interns could learn a little bit. They could also contribute and hopefully we could be mutually beneficial. So he found 3 grads that were highly recommended, and we put them on our project and gave them some tasks. And unfortunately, a month later, we could not merge any code from any of them. Like none of their code was good enough to merge in and actually use in a production environment. So the big takeaway there was, these grads look great on paper. They had graduated from CS programs, but they couldn't write yet. Now I'm sure they'll go on and have great careers, but there is a big difference between book smarts and street smarts. So a couple tips about the way you should test and the way we test is set up the test in a way that's similar to how you're going to interact with the developer in the future. So if you're going to use a piece of project management software to send this person tasks, then set up your test within that project management software. And if you know like the next 15 tasks you need a developer to do, well, list them out and look for the most common task and then send them that task as part of the test. Now, as a non-technical person, it's going to be hard for you to test people, particularly when you're trying to find your first technology leader. The only thing I can say there is maybe find a agency or a development shop like Blink or others that would be willing to set up a test for you within the parameters that I just described. And you can trust them because they have online reviews, they have experience. It'll be a little bit more expensive than an individual developer would be, but you can leverage their expertise to find the right people if they're open to that. I know we are. I don't know what other agencies would be open to or other dev shops, but the other thing I will say about tests is don't use them as part of your filtering process. Ask all your questions, do all your interview, narrow it down to a couple candidates, and then make your bet, choose your horse, and then put them through a test. Now, early on at Blink, we would actually pay developers to take our test, but it was too expensive and the success rate was too low because they didn't have any skin in the game. So what we started to do now is we still, we make our bet, we commit to bringing on one person, and we send them a lifelike test. And if they pass, we guarantee them billable work. And passing is just as simple as sending us production-ready code that we could use, that we would be okay selling to an imaginary client. So hopefully that's helpful. As a benchmark, our filtering process filters out about 99% of applicants. So if we got 100 applicants for a position, we're only selecting one person to go through the test. And as a benchmark for you, of that 1% that gets through our filters and actually takes the test, it's about 1/2 to 75% actually pass the test. It was lower back when we would pay people to take the test because there was no risk for them to take it. But now that there's a little risk, they have to be confident enough in their abilities to take the risk. And we also take a little bit of risk too because we're administering the test and giving them feedback and all that. So definitely have to test everyone, and hopefully you can find it. Once you find your technical lead, they can start administering the test and doing that. Next tip. This is still related to finding good people. It's, as in any industry, success is all about finding good people. And here's another tip related to that we found extremely important. It's rare. It's actually rare for developers to be able to see to be able to achieve business goals effectively. Maybe I should word that a different way. It's rare for them to be able to see through business eyes. And so that's what you want to be looking for, particularly with your technology lead, but it's also somewhat important for other resource developers. But you want to check the way they think about frameworks, languages, technologies, packages, tools. Get a sense for what they're thinking about when they make those recommendations. Are they looking at these recommendations through the eyes of the business? Do they understand the business and the trade-offs that any recommendation that they make could have? I can't stress enough how important it is that your technology person is thinking of things in terms of business, because their decisions will last probably the life of the company. If what they build becomes business critical, then it's going to end up being extremely costly to ever rebuild, and it's just going to become integrated into every aspect of your business. And so it's important that they're recommending the correct technologies. And so in an effort to help you as a non-technical person kind of see some of the biases that developers experience, I've listed a couple here. I'll go through them really quickly. Adopting technologies too early for business. Now, if you think about it, it makes sense. Developers are early adopters of probably everything. And so you have to look for developers who know that they tend to do that and who are aware that there is a point where it's too early for business to adopt stuff. It's too costly. And unfortunately, this is a bias that developers have. They tend to adopt stuff too early. They love the new and shiny thing. So watch out for that. Building versus remodeling. This is an unconscious bias we have. We like code that we wrote. We understand it. It kind of sticks in our short-term memory better. It's less difficult to read and to work with. And so there's a bias to want to build or rebuild everything that developers work on. Now, that bias is very expensive, and it's not good for business all the time. In fact, I would say about 80% of the recommendations that I've ever seen to rebuild should not have been a rebuild recommendation. It should have been a remodel recommendation, because rebuilding ends up being extremely costly. And that leads into the next point, which is underestimating. A lot of times developers underestimate the amount of time it's going to take to rebuild stuff. And so you just got to watch out for that. Everything seems easy until the rubber hits the road, until you dig into the task and realize all the intricacies and all the dependencies to something you're trying to do. Couple other biases to watch out for, just to check that your technical person is looking through business eyes. Dismissing languages or frameworks. There's a tendency, developers in general are a little bit opinionated, and I'm throwing out a lot of generalities, but in general, developers are quite opinionated, and so you need to watch out for when those opinions kind of, they don't take into account the full picture. So, for instance, dismissing languages, there's a good example. There's a language that's called PHP, and it gets a bad rap among developers. It was created by a non-developer, and it had some weird stuff early on in the language's life that led a lot of people to not like it. And it just kind of never shedded those problems. And it has some trade-offs. It has some good things, but also some trade-offs about the language. Anyways, there's lots of developers that like literally would never be caught dead writing PHP, despite the fact that it is the most common language online in the world, which means that it's cheaper to find developers who are good at it, and therefore the projects that are written in it are more affordable. So, like I said, there's trade-offs to everything. You just need to be aware that there's a bias to dismiss stuff that could be helpful to your business, and push back on developers if they dismiss stuff that maybe you think they shouldn't, and ask them. A good way to push back is to ask them, what are the trade-offs? Like, why do people use it? What's good about it? And see if they're able to articulate what's good about it, to confirm that they're not just dismissing stuff that could be helpful to your business. This is more important before you kind of choose your technology partner. Once you've found someone good, then it's less important to kind of question them. But I just read a book by about the founder of Walmart, Sam Walton. He was kind of technology averse, but it was technology that helped him build his distribution system and build the largest retailer network in the world. So, but his strategy was that he kind of pushed back on everything until they are able to convince him that it's important. And that was a good strategy for him. They avoided a lot of pitfalls that they would have otherwise fallen in, and they were still able to have really cutting edge distribution technology that enabled them to do what they did. So last thing, extreme opinions. I mentioned that developers have some of these extreme opinions. You just need to watch out for them. What happens is, like, a tech magazine will write some article, and then all of a sudden, like, all the developers are like, oh, if anybody who's not doing this must not have read that article and they must not be that smart or something. I don't know. I haven't figured it out totally, but just, one example of this is test-driven development. This has become kind of a buzzword, and there's some developers that are just like so extreme. Everything has to be tested. I mean, the font color, we need a test to make sure that font color doesn't change. And I'm like, why would you test for that? Like, if you don't want the font color to change, then just don't change it. So I could dig in there a little bit more. There's some others, like everything should be written in components, or everything should be mobile first. Don't get me wrong, these are all good ideas, and they all have good benefits and some detriments. The trick is to just look for people who are able to articulate the trade-offs and not just kind of buying into the hype. So I think that's enough about that. Jumping in to the next tip, which is visibility of the code. This one is a good one, I think. There needs to be someone on your team who is responsible for reviewing every line of code. We have technology today that allows us to track every character that's changed in a code base, even the invisible characters like line endings. So there's no excuse to not have someone reviewing all the code. I've been on big projects, big teams with for nationwide known brands where no one was reviewing all the code, and it was a nightmare. Stuff would break, and it was just buggy, and no one was responsible for the code, and it ended up, in that particular project, it ended up costing the project like 3 or 4 times more to complete, just because they didn't have that simple check at the beginning. Every line of code is reviewed by someone, whether it's the technology lead or somebody else, a little less senior, but super important. It does add a little bit of cost. It's about 10%, we estimate, but that you get that back in security help and catching bugs before they make it to a production server. And another really good benefit is we filtered our developers, and then we tested them, and now we're going to review the code that they submit. That helps us make sure that developers are able to take feedback, they're delivering consistent value, writing readable code, improving consistently, communicating clearly, meeting deadlines. All of that becomes very clear when there's someone who's responsible to review that code and help those developers improve and kind of not miss stuff that's already in the code base that they maybe didn't realize. So it's a good tip. Next one is budget time for approvals. Back when I did my first technology project that I told you about with the onshore-offshore team, I was surprised at how long it took me to approve and test everything that they sent. I was a little put off by it, but have since learned that it's normal. It's part of technical projects. The developers sometimes get so much in the weeds of the code and the logic that they need a second pair of eyes. They need someone on the product team to go in and click all the buttons, to go through the user flow, make sure the logic still works once you see it. Sometimes on paper, the logic looks great, but once you're clicking through a website, you realize, oh, well, we need to add a step here or change the logic slightly. So I can't emphasize enough how important it is for you as the non-technical founder or as just the product side of the team to budget time to check all those little things that could be missed. And hopefully your dev team will adapt quickly. If I've seen a lot of people onshore, a lot of developers are able to adapt quickly to the requirements of the project that come from the product side of the team. So, and just a reminder, you're the resident expert on the business. Typically, as the non-technical founder, you're the like super user. You're the product person, and so you have to budget that time. Compensation. Everybody loves to talk about money. And I have a couple tips about this for non-technical people. First, the 5 most common ways of compensation are equity only, salary plus equity, just salary, high hourly, or fixed bid. These are the most common types of compensation packages. And I'll talk a little bit about some of these. Mostly the strategy you're going to choose is based on your budget. So if you have no budget, you really don't have any option except the equity only. But the thing I want to caution you about is some states have laws against free labor, obviously. And I wish I knew what Colorado's laws are. You'd need to talk to a lawyer about it. And I don't use that compensation package myself. So I've never had my lawyer look into it, but definitely recommend, if you're going to go that route, to make sure you're in the clear. The problem with equity only is it's going to slow your progress because all of your resources are going to have some sort of day job. And it's also it's the probability of finding people who are open to that compensation package is quite low. The upside is that it's, there's a lot of skin in the game. So anybody who does work on your project is definitely going to be there for the long term, or at least more likely to be there. So if you have a large budget, a couple of tips. Most of the teams that I see with large budgets, they kind of stick to the salary plus equity. Typically, it's like low salary plus equity compensation, and that's great. That's fine. But I would advise you to not pay your leadership team like that. So back to the amazing Technicolor Dream Coder, you're going to want to look for your technology lead, and it sometimes helps your budget if that technology lead isn't full time, because if they are, then they're going to be doing lots of stuff that is below their pay grade, if that makes sense. Where you could pay somebody a lot cheaper to do the tasks that you're having them do, but you can't afford that person because you're paying this really high salary leader. So anyways, yeah, the recommendation is try to find a fractional leadership team if possible, and then reserve your money for the amazing Technicolor Dream Coder who you can give a salary and some equity to. So a couple other tips. If you have a small budget, don't be afraid to go fractional all the way. It can save you a lot of money by choosing the exact resource for the task. If you have a security task, you send it to a security person. If you have a leadership task, you send it to a fractional technology leader. If you have a front-end development task, you send it to a front-end developer that's a little cheaper than a back-end developer. So that's the second to last thing I want to say about compensation, the last thing is compensation diversity is something I've been thinking about for a little bit now and talking a little bit about. The way you pay people affects the way that they think about their work. And I've actually seen a lot of success with diversity of thought on a team based on how the team is compensated. So having some salary people, having some hourly people. For instance, hourly resources typically look at how much value am I providing for each hour or each day. So they're much more granularly focused on value, whereas salary people are much more focused on the big picture of the project. Both of those points of view are valuable and they can be complementary. So definitely think about compensating in different ways for your team. All right, security. It's super important. Obviously, you need someone on your team who's familiar with security. It's probably your technology lead, but you could always hire a fractional security person. At the very least, security should be a topic of conversation in like your weekly leadership meetings. Make sure that everything your technology people are doing is buttoned down. Make sure you understand it at least. You don't have to understand like the nuts and bolts of it, but understand at a high level, like what are the things that we're doing for security on our code base. Some things that are quite popular are like web app scanning. That's when you have a little bit more budget, you can afford some of this automatic scanning. Other tips related to this are the fact that open source software is actually quite good at plugging up security loopholes and stuff. So making sure that the software that you use is approved and is widely used online. A couple other tips, just practical tips here. Antivirus software on any computer that touches a live server. It's a must. Definitely make sure that you have antivirus software on there. Let's see. Two-factor authentication for anything that's connected to a live server. That means code. Any program that has access to your code, you, if possible, have two-factor authentication. That means any parts of your build process and obviously your live servers, any of those accounts need two-factor authentication. Never share passwords, particularly passwords to the services I just mentioned. Open source software, make sure that it's approved by your team lead. You can't have resource developers just deciding what open source software to use. You could get into issues with licensing, as well as them choosing a package that's maintained by like one developer in Russia, which could be a huge security loophole depending on your industry. So that's a tip. Environments, you want to have separate environments. Never develop on a live server. Make sure that developers can develop on their local machines. Then once they kind of sandbox their new features, they send it to a testing environment. You test it, the product team tests it, the tech lead reviews the code, and then after it's approved, it goes to a live environment. So you want to have different environments, and then you want to limit access. We try to limit access on the live servers to only 1 or 2 people at any given time, and it's just who has access, or there's just less vulnerable points in the system if very few people have access. This is my last tip. This is also the most common tip that you'll see online. Learn to code. It's not necessary, but it is a nice to have. And a lot of people think it's harder than it really is. It's taught in all the trade schools. It's very easy to pick up. And actually, some of the best coders I've ever met have come right out of trade schools. So I think it's just some people think differently, and they happen to have a natural talent for development. And If you don't, that's okay. You can learn to read code quite easily, and that can be helpful to you as a non-technical founder. But I want to stress again, if you just hate code and even the thought of looking at code just gives you nightmares, don't worry. You can still be successful on technical projects. It's possible. And that's the last thing I want to say is there are many, many great examples of non-technical people being successful on technical projects. To name a few, Airbnb was started by a non-technical founder, Pinterest, Pandora, Dell, StyleSheet, Claravine, Snap, which eventually sold to Snapchat. All of these were started by non-technical founders with success, and you can do it. Thank you so much for your time. If you have a second after this, I think we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A. And if you wouldn't mind filling out the survey, help me know how I did, or if I should just give up public speaking altogether, feel free to do that. Leave me that comment as well. Anyways, thanks.
I hope you don't give up public speaking, Ben. That was a great session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just dropped the link to that survey in the comments and chats. It doesn't appear that we have any questions right now. I'll let people comment if there is anything on people's minds. But I did have one thing that I was thinking about for somebody who's not particularly, and you touched on this a little bit, but for somebody who's not particularly savvy when it comes to tech, hiring that first tech lead in early stages of the project seems like a big hump to overcome.
Yeah.
It's a big hurdle to cross.
Yeah.
So, and I know you had mentioned to seek out a company like yours or other fractional CTO services to design a test or some kind of thing for that first lead. Are there other things that people should be thinking about aside from a couple of the biases that you had mentioned when they are trying to bring on that first lead?
Get a couple options, I think, would maybe be another thing that I haven't mentioned up to this point. You'll when you talk to people, you'll get a sense for what's important to them and what's important to the industry, and so yeah, don't just choose like your neighbor Fred who seems to have done something technical in the past. Like put some fillers out and get a couple good candidates and like I said, put them through a test and you should be able to find somebody for sure.
Well, Ben, thank you again so much for joining us here at Long Run Startup Week. It has been such a pleasure to have you. And I think I don't see any further questions or comments. So we'll be back at 2 with our next session. So Ben, thank you again.
Thank you. Good luck.